now call to order the Village of Riverside Board of Trustees regular meeting for Thursday, September 3rd, 2015, immediately following the public hearing on subdivision applications. Please call the roll.
President Gonzalez.
Here.
Trustee Ballerini. Here. Trustee Collins. Trustee Lumsden.
Here.
Trustee Sedeby.
Here.
Trustee Pollock.
Here.
Village Manager Francis.
Here.
Village Attorney Mars.
Here.
Also present Village Clerk Haley.
We have a quorum. If you'll please rise for the pledge. With the permission of the board, because I know that there are a number of people that were here for the public hearing, I would suggest that before we move on to presentations and public comment, that we consider the ordinance for the temporary 180-day moratorium. Is there any objection to doing that? Or is there any further comment either from the public or from the board? I'd ask for a motion and a second to enact the ordinance.
I move to enact with the passage stricken.
With the passage stricken. Motion by Ms. Collins.
Second.
Second by Mr. Ballerini. Please call the roll.
Trustee Ballerini.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
The motion carries. Thank you to everyone who came for the public hearing this evening. Next up are presentations and public comment. If you would like to address the board this evening, I ask that you do so from the podium, that you please state your name and address so the folks at home can hear and see what you have to say. First up, we have a presentation by the Riverside Garden Club. Ms. Wyaduck.
Joan Wyaduck, 165 Bartram Road, Riverside. On behalf, I am the president currently of the Riverside Garden Club, and for many years we have made presentations to the village for parkway trees. So this evening I am here on behalf of the Garden Club, and there are many members in the audience tonight that are also members of the Garden Club. And I would like to present to the village the amount of $2,500, and this will be given to use for parkway trees. So
That's wonderful. Thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you to the Garden Club for that. It'll be well used, I assure you. It reminds me, there was a great talk given last night at the public library by our village forester on the state of the urban forest, so he'll be very glad to see this. Further public comment? Hearing none, we'll move on to reports of village officers. I have no report this evening. Ms. Francis?
I have two quick items with regard to the Harlem Avenue closing. Chief Weitzel actually provided me an update today with regard to traffic enforcement. Obviously, the police department has been very busy over the last several days with regard to cut-through traffic through Riverside. As of this afternoon, the police department had issued 128 citations for varying levels of violations. All of them are local ordinance violations. However, the police are out in full force for those that are cutting through Riverside with regard to that particular closing. I was also notified that tentatively that street should open tomorrow at 3 o'clock. So that is as of right now. Obviously, that could be subject to change, but that is our tentative time at this point. Additionally, I wanted to provide the village board an update on economic incentives. You'll notice that it's not on the agenda. Staff is still compiling some additional information, and we should have that on a future agenda, probably the next meeting's agenda for action on. And that's all I have.
Any questions for the manager? Hearing none, we'll move on to the approval of the consent agenda. Are there any items that need to be removed for discussion? Hearing none, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve.
So moved.
Motion by Mr. Ballerini, second by Ms. Collins. Please call the roll.
Trustee Ballerini.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Sedeby.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. Next up are reports of departments, commissions, and trustee liaison. Are there any liaison reports first? I did ask our Parks and Recreation Director, Mr. Malchiotti, to come speak to us tonight. You might have noticed this afternoon around the village some blue ribbons being tied to some of our trees, and Mr. Malchiotti is going to explain to us what that's all about.
Thank you. The Riverside Parks and Recreation Department supports all of our public safety officials and first responders, but in the wake of recent events, we thought it was important to show that support by placing blue ribbons around trees in Guthrie Park and at the historic water tower to show not only our police department, but law enforcement officials everywhere that we thank you for putting on that uniform and protecting us. We wish the same safe environment for you that you provide for us every day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Malchiotti. A very welcome tribute to our police officers. Further reports from departments? Hearing none, we'll move on to ordinances and resolutions. We have before us a resolution authorizing the village manager to execute a contract in the amount of $1,499,436 with Triggy Construction for the 2015 Street Improvement Program. Who is presenting this?
Mr. Bailey's right.
Mr. Bailey?
Good evening, everybody. This is some delightful news to just about all the village residents. The 2015 Street Improvement Program, this is, the majority of this is funded by the bond issue that was approved for renewal recently. The other source of funding is motor fuel tax. The village is planning to resurface North Delaplane Road, Audubon Road. These are portions of the roads, Nuttall Road, and do partial reconstructions of Lawton Road and Shenstone. And there's a short section just west of the Forest Avenue Bridge, I guess beginning at the west approach of the Forest Avenue Bridge to the point where IDOT started their paving project. At any rate, those bids, that project was bid out, bids were received. The low bidder is Triggy Construction, the amount of $1,489,436. And the project is tentatively scheduled to begin September 8th, which is next Tuesday. It'll start at the north end of the village with these resurfacing streets, Nuttall, Audubon, and the other one, and then move down into these, I kind of lived this project for months on end, and you can't remember the streets, but at any rate, Lawton and Shenstone will be the last streets because those are partial reconstructions, but even with those streets, activity like saw cutting is likely to start on September 8th also. Construction signs, detour signs, they'll all be starting up on September 8th, so this project's ready to go.
Excellent. Questions for Mr. Bailey?
What is partial reconstruction?
They're taking it, the street down for resurfacing. They're really just grinding, an inch and a half off or so, and they might do some curb repair, especially where the street isn't draining. Partial reconstructions are taking it down to the sub base.
But it's the entire section. It's not, we're not just doing parts of Lawton. We're doing
No.
that entire.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
60% of the curb, for instance, on that street will be replaced, but we're salvaging 40%.
Because I was driving down that street today and was thinking the residents would be very happy.
I think that's what I meant. Everybody's probably
Questions for Mr.
looking for
Bailey?
this.
Ms. Ray, all the utilities underneath that, we don't have any proposed future projects that are on those streets?
No.
Like the sewer project or any of that stuff?
No.
Okay.
And that's an important thing that we're doing is trying to avoid, like we have a street condition survey that evaluates the streets and ranks their condition worst to best. And we have some instances where there might be some streets that are in worse condition, like Berry Point would be a good example, that the condition of the street is worse than some of these other ones, but we're planning a sewer project there next year, which would result in resurfacing of that street, so we're kind of hopping over that one.
No, that makes, I just wanted to make sure that was the case,
Yeah.
and we weren't going to be tearing it up in 6 months from now when the sewer project comes through.
Perish the thought.
Right, okay. Thank you.
Hearing nothing further, I'd ask for a motion and a second to approve the resolution.
So moved.
Motion by Ms. Collins, second by Mr. Lumsden. Please call the roll.
Trustee Valerie.
Aye.
Trustee Collins.
Aye.
Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Setterby.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. Mr. Chairman. Next up are considerations, and the first is a continued discussion of the 10-year capital improvement plan that we began at our last meeting, and that will flow rather naturally into the second item, which is a discussion of our five-year financial forecast. Mr. Salinas, and before you begin, I would just like to say that that this is a very, very helpful work product here. The way that you've broken it out with regard to the rankings that the trustees gave at the last meeting, and also breaking out the various funding sources. It's extremely useful. So it's a very nice job. So we'll start with the capital improvement plan. Did you have any preparatory remarks?
Yes, I do. Good evening, Board of Trustees. Tonight, we will continue discussion of the village's 10-year capital improvement plan. As the President alluded to, we began discussion at the last board meeting, and at the last meeting, the village board helped prioritize the listing of capital items on a scale of 1 to 3, 1 having the highest priority, 3 having the lowest priority. The board also discussed funding of these various capital projects and requested additional information concerning cost estimates and scope of work from staff. As part of this agenda packet, we have included a schedule that lists each proposed capital item for 2016 for every fund, general fund, water sewer fund, all the other funds, and for the and all of those projects have been, like I said, prioritized. In its current form, the total of the 2016 capital items for the capital projects fund is $5,689,750. This represents a decrease of approximately $528,000 from the list that was discussed at the previous board meeting, and the primary reason for this decrease is there was the removal of $250,000 for the Pine Street Water Reservoir renovation that was moved to the unfunded schedule. There was a withdrawal of $50,000 for the consulting study for the remodeling of the police station that was deferred to 2017. There was a reduction of $250,000 in street improvements based on revised funding estimates or available funding estimates. And the capital items, as for the other funds, that has remained unchanged from the previous list. So the only major changes were in the capital projects fund. So at the direction of the village manager, also included in the agenda packet is a revised schedule that matches the 2016 capital items in the capital projects fund to its funding source, as President Sells alluded to. So in its current form, of the $5,689,750 in capital projects in the capital projects fund, approximately $4,457,560, or 78%, will be funded from grants, bond proceeds, non-home rule sales tax, or existing assigned fund balance. So that means the other $1,232,190, or 22%, is to be funded from unassigned fund balance from the general fund. Now, according to my recent projections, I am projecting that approximately $964,540 in funds will be available at the beginning of 2016. So that means that, if you compare that to the $1.2 million in projects that's currently on the list, that means that approximately $255,000 in additional unassigned funds may need to be transferred from the general fund to the capital projects fund. And then included in the agenda packet are updated memos prepared by village staff that contains additional information requested by the board. So at this time, I'd like to answer any questions or any comments.
Any questions, Mr. Salinas, before we continue our discussion?
Thank you for doing this. This is wonderful.
Very helpful.
Thank you for the font, too. It's getting bigger.
I can actually see this. That's right. Got to put my magnifying glass away. Before we go into this any further, Mr. Sev, did Mr. Sev?
Correct.
Mr. Sev, you have a copy of what's before us. The village manager did give a short memo to the village board tonight regarding facility utilization and fleet management. And most specifically, it would pertain to the item with regard to the rubble garage demolition. There has been a kind of a broader discussion, especially among police and fire and the village manager, concerning whether we might want to consider a more global approach to our facility usage. And that would entail moving the 125,000, at least delaying that until next year, until we can look at whether there's something that we can do on a larger scale with regard to E911 that we discussed last time, the youth center, and the police and fire stations. It seems to me that to piecemeal something out, like $125,000 expenditure, if we're then going to go back and try to make a broader attempt to rectify this, it seems kind of money poorly spent. So I guess the first question I would have is whether there is a consensus that we can at this time, pull the 125 for the rebel garage. Is that a yes?
Yes.
Okay, so that will be deferred. Similarly, there also with regard to the landscape islands on Quincy, upon further reflection with the manager and I were talking that really this seems to be a bit premature because we don't really have a design yet in terms of trying to extend the design for the Burlington streetscape. So the thought is we should wait till we get through Burlington and then before we start making any design changes on Quincy. So similarly, was everybody okay with deferring that issue?
And the reason to do that now is because Quincy was going to be worked on, is that?
That was the thought, is it's going to be resurfaced.
Right.
But the concern is that if we do it and then we come, because really a master design has not been done
Right.
for Quincy at this point. And if it turns out that the bump outs didn't work, then now we're going to go right back in and be moving trees again.
Right.
Okay, so we'll do that one.
I have a question on that.
Yes, sir.
So we're going to go ahead and pave it and just not do the landscape islands?
Right,
Based on
Okay.
this consensus.
And then study it later?
right.
Okay.
Right. So those were the two I had. Are there any other items on the rankings that individual trustees would like to discuss?
The $75,000 traffic study?
Can you hear us, Mr. Sedevi?
I can.
Okay. What about it?
You know, I don't know if we have enough information on spending that kind of money and what exactly is it going to bring back to us. It's just, I don't know, it just seems like a lot of money to spend. And what exactly are we going to get for it? I mean, it doesn't seem like it's not going to give us a full village traffic study. It's only going to give us a section. Am I correct?
No, this one, the one that was deferred from this year was piecemeal. This is anticipating, now we won't know until we actually get a final proposal, but this is an anticipation that would be a village-wide traffic safety
Please.
study. Obviously, even if we were to budget it and it came in well over, the board would have the opportunity to either defer it for a future year or decide that they don't want to move forward with it.
So the village-wide, I think I don't have a problem with that.
Yes, I think that's what I was in support of, rather than just, because how do we pick which part of the village gets the safety study and which part does not, right? And that's why we went to a bigger one, held over from last year and then put it this year. That's my understanding.
Are we confident that at the $75,000 level, we will get responsible RFPs?
Riverside is very unique in the,
In many ways.
it's not like any other community that you will get a proposal for. It's not similar to LaGrange or River Forest. So there are different things that anyone that's evaluating it as part of a traffic safety study would have to look at. So this is based on comparable sized communities when they've received traffic safety studies. I won't know, we won't know, staff will not know until we actually start moving forward.
And I think when we get those numbers, then we can decide if it's something that
Correct.
we can support.
Correct.
Further comments on the traffic safety study?
Yes.
Would it be possible to bid out or get more certain cost numbers on the traffic study without having it in the budget?
We could, and then it would just be a year-end budget amendment if the board is amenable to that.
I would be more comfortable with that, and I think we discussed before too, disruption with the streetscape improvements and timing of the study anyway. That would certainly be my suggestion.
What's the difference?
Yeah, we got a budget line item, we can always not use it. I'd rather keep it in there, and that gives the staff the opportunity to start getting proposals and talk about what scope, and then we can discuss if the scope that we can get for 75,000 is appropriate, like we did before when there was 30,000 in there, right? We felt that it wasn't appropriate at that time. I mean, I think we need to act on letting you guys, the staff, get a chance to get out there and understand that, so we can be responsive to the folks in the village that think we have a safety problem, and we can respond to that. And this will give some intel to the chief on maybe where we need to apply more staffing and stuff like that based upon what the traffic study produces. I think that's where we're at.
I have a lot of concerns about this. I don't mind leaving it in the budget. I don't mind taking it out either, but I think it definitely should wait until the Burlington project is completed and the public gets used to using it, which means 2017 at the earliest, I think, because I think that could sway things. Secondly, though, I'm just not convinced we're going to get anything out of this that we're going to be willing to do. So I'm far from, to the point, regardless of the Burlington project, I'm far from the point of wanting to spend any money on this.
Well, as of this point, the Burlington project is anticipated a 90-day construction.
Right.
So, knock on wood, it should be completed by mid-July. So, in theory, the study, but to your point, is July and August the time you want to be doing a traffic study?
Right. Or even,
Chief Weitzel, do you have any insight on the timing aspects of this?
Well, I know when we collaborated with District 96, we did it during the school year because that's what their professionals told us to do when the traffic would be out. The school, they said school buses, I reminded them we didn't have any, but the children would be out, traffic would be out. So I would think that the fall would be a time to do that. And there will be recommendations in the studies that I've seen, not only for where we could deploy resources, but choices you'll have to make, I think, for anything from devices that could be put in the roadway to we've had the discussion about bumps and humps and speed and design. So some of them are longer. They'll give you a report. Some of them are longer for when we design roadways in the future, stripe roadways in the future. I think a comprehensive report will include all that. And then what I've seen, the board has to look and see what's feasible. And so some of the information they'll give us, we could probably put into service very quickly, and some of it that they'll have in that report will be much longer for boards and future boards to deal with when they're looking at roads. And I think I discussed that with Director Bailey before, and he's on the same page as I am.
So with that assumption that we would be able to do, assuming we get a proposal, we'd be able to do it the next school year. So with that in mind, it looks to me that we have a consensus to leave this in at this point.
I'm willing to leave it in as long as it's understood that it's not a done deal that we're going to do it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it'll depend
That
on
we're
what.
just a placeholder,
what we get.
basically, and we're going to revisit it before anything's done.
Do you have anything further, Mr. Sadovy?
No, I am just afraid though that because it's in the budget, it becomes fait accompli, and I can't understand what the scope is. I don't understand what the scope of the traffic safety study is. So that's what I'm struggling with.
I don't think with this board we have to worry about anything being a fait accompli.
And I don't think that any of us know what the scope is until we get back the
Right.
proposals. So I mean, that's what I'm looking for also, is what are we getting for our money here? So I think that will be the discussion that's had.
Are there other items for discussion on the capital plan? I have one more, but I think there was there further discussion about the sewer vac truck, or?
Is that on?
It is on here. It's on the
It's on
second
the
page.
prioritization list.
So is it in the budget right now?
Well, it's being proposed
It's being
to
proposed?
be.
It's under water and sewer.
Yeah, I have issues with that. just the numbers to me don't make sense, that it's something that we would want to do. I understand that it does have a savings for the village, but I think by the time you recouped what you spent on it, we would need a new one well before then.
Well, you're looking at, so granted, the village does have upfront costs. And I don't know if you saw this latest table
Yeah.
from Director Slans. With regard to that, we're looking at just a 10-year useful life. Staff has, proven time and time again that usually we extend a lot of our equipment beyond what the manufacturer is stating is the useful life of a particular piece. So 10 years is based on what the manufacturer is saying. Our estimates would probably be closer to 12 to 15 years we could get utilization out of that vehicle. And this is just dependent on catch basin cleaning. So that's no other preventative maintenance cleaning that we would be able to do in-house. With the sewer vac, and I just want to refer back to, there's a number of things that you can do with the sewer vac. You can clean sewer lines, manholes, catch basins. You can do preventative maintenance and emergency operations. There are times where we have to wait for a contractor to come out versus being able to do certain things in-house in addition to the hydro excavation that it allows as well, which is a safety measure on top of it. And I hate to remind everyone, but we're at a $50,000 deductible, so anything that just ups the safety measure is always a good thing.
I guess it's at this kind of dollar level, I always wonder though whether it's possible either a used machine or having some kind of share with other municipalities.
I've reached out to another community of comparable size, and that manager has told me that they use that piece of equipment on a regular basis. And then, so sharing it for them, for all intensive purposes, wouldn't make sense because they utilize it on, you pretty much said, on a daily basis.
So obviously, they're not cleaning their catch basins on a daily basis. They're using it for a lot of things.
Correct.
And I think that's probably where this board has their block is maybe we don't quite understand
Right.
the amount of other things that it can be used for, like the hydro excavating. I mean, I don't think anyone, I didn't know what hydro excavating was until I spent, some time with Director Bailey, and he told me what it was, and where you can actually work on a hole, and you do this all the time, so you could probably explain better than I can.
Well, I have no issues in investing in something that is going to give our public works folks an advantage, because then we don't have to worry about bids coming in later on that are higher. If we have this and he has a chance to use it for a lot of different things in excess of the one that will justify its existence, that's the way I was looking at it. Do we have, right now, what I've seen is our staff has told us that just in the sewer cleaning alone, this vehicle will justify its existence and save us $7,000, right?
On average a year.
An average
over
year.
The 10 years.
So it's just paid for itself just to take care of the sewer stuff. And now Ed has a tool in his tool pouch to do other stuff that sometimes can be crisis management, right? Sometimes we have to react very quickly, and we don't have to wait around for somebody else or to do an emergency funding or something like that. So I am leaning toward this is a good expenditure for that reason.
How would we
But again, I
finance?
use them all the time, so.
The Water and Sewer Fund currently has a sufficient cash flow to fund this. And it would be bid out, or we would make sure that it's competitively priced, whether it's through the state bid or bid out on its own. And it would ultimately be an item that would come back to the village board for board approval.
What does this do overall to the village and sewer fund with everything else that we have in the village and sewer fund to do, like all the sewer project that we've, the millions of dollars we have? Does this put this on hold? Does this?
Well, we'd have to evaluate based on those projects, on their merit on their own, when they're bid out. For example, the street program came in under bid. So then now we have those additional funds to utilize else for another street program for next fiscal year. So we have to basically evaluate it on each different bid that we receive for each different project. Obviously, staff is seeking additional funding for various water and sewer separation projects. where we can't grant funding. But we would have to provide a projection, essentially, for the board. Because obviously we have the one large sewer separation project that'll be coming to the board. Will be budgeted for fiscal year 2016 because it won't get underway until then, and that's in the first division. So we'll have to see where that pricing comes into play. So it'll be something that we'll have to evaluate with the sewer rates. Sewer rates have, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, but sewer rates haven't been increased since 2002. So that's something also for consideration. You know, my stance is we should take a very proactive approach in investing in maintaining our capital and infrastructure, because there's been some time where it hasn't been maintained, and so we're somewhat being reactive at certain points, and I'd like to take more of a stance of being proactive.
Mr. Pollack and Mr. Sedevi, do you have comments? Mr. Pollack?
Yes, this one seems pretty easy to me. I think we need to do this. The staff feels strongly about it. I agree with Trustee Lumsden that the numbers speak for themselves. I'm all for doing this, buying this truck.
Mr. Sedevi?
I concur as well. I think that the sewer cleaning cost analysis we were sent shortly before the meeting was compelling. And as long as staff prioritizes this, and we're not going to get a surprise opportunity to do another separation for $400,000 elsewhere in the village in the short term, I certainly would support being more proactive with this.
Okay. All right, so any other items before I go to my big one here?
I'd just like to make just a basic statement. I think at the last meeting, on one of my rants, I spoke about the vehicles and that, and all the vehicles had 3s on them, and I talked about the program that we bought and everything like that, and they're all on here. And I just want to explain why they're on here. I've had an opportunity to talk to Deputy Chief Buckley, Chief Weitzel, and Director Bailey, and Director Apt. They've all invited me over to the offices, and we kind of went over a lot of things. And as that program is, in my mind, I probably oversimplified it a little bit, thinking that it would give us certain things, and it will give us certain information, but the bigger it's definitely a needed program, but the bigger information is really a public works information. That's why I think that's why you have seen this fleet utilization or fleet management memo that Jessica went on, this point system, which Director Bailey brought up to me, and he actually gave me a great book that I curled up with. But it was a very simple system that I actually applied to the cars that were on our system that were coming up for replacement, and like the command vehicle for the fire truck, or for the fire command vehicle, the fire car. At a point system of 28 or above, it says you should replace it immediately. When I did the quick, that thing got about a 46. That should be done immediately. So I have no problem with any of the vehicles on here. I just want everyone to know it. I do hope that we can take a look at the police vehicle, possibly reutilize it, because the Tahoe would be wonderful to use because it's only 3 years old, and I think the trade-in value is underestimated, and I'd like to try to keep that if we could. So I think as long as that's being considered, that'd be wonderful. And I just also like to thank staff for the time that they took with me, and I appreciate it very much. And for this detailed report that they gave me, and for them to know that it didn't go unread. And it's wonderful, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Valerie. The only other one that I would like to draw attention to is the resurfacing of parking lot number 1. As most of you probably know, I've had a strong desire for many years to emphasize and give reality to the 2008 referendum we had regard to our green infrastructure. You have before you the cost comparisons that Mr. Bailey gave to us with regard to reconstruction with porous pavers, asphalt, or a combination of porous pavers and asphalt. And, you know, at first blush, it just seems like there's such a disparity for the folks at home. The parking lot number 1, which is beside the train station, to reconstruct with porous pavers like we have in our green parking lot is roughly $744,000. To reconstruct with asphalt is $327,000. However, asphalt has a useful life of 15 to 20 years. Porous pavers have a useful life of 50 years. So if you use that multiplier, if you take the asphalt cost times 2.5, you'll find that over time, over the lifetime of the parking lot, the porous pavers are actually less expensive. It all has to do with the upfront cost. What I would be interested in seeing before we make any final decision on this would be an analysis of the parking lot fund. I don't think that there is sufficient funding in the parking, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's probably not sufficient money in the parking lot fund to do this at one swoop. However, we do have the option to do interest-free loans with interfund loans, and then the parking lot fund would pay back over time. So I would like to see that financial analysis done and brought to the board so that we can make a decision whether this is the time finally that we make a step toward the sustainable infrastructure that our village voted 80% on in 2008. So with your permission, I would have the staff provide that. Mr. Pollard?
I completely agree. I feel very strongly about it myself. I think the cost-benefit analysis is one thing, but there's also an aesthetic and environmental and a community value impact that we're looking at here that is significant in my opinion. So I would agree.
So is that okay with everybody if we
Can we borrow from the 911 fund?
You know, that's an interesting question. The question was, can you borrow from the E911 fund? My understanding is that you cannot do interfund loans between enterprise funds. Is that correct?
Well,
There are certain things with regard to E911 that would preclude you from taking it from E911. Yeah.
And I like the way you said that, like really under your voice there so nobody else could hear it.
We could put a 911 station in the middle of the parking lot.
There you go. Okay, so we'll get that back. With that further analysis, is there anything else in the 10-year capital improvement plan before we move on? Okay. All right. Next up then is the Village of Riverside 5-year financial forecast plan. Mr. Salinas?
okay, so tonight we begin the initial formal discussion of the village's 5-year financial forecast. The purpose of this forecast is to provide the board with information concerning projected revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance for all of the village's funds for a 5-year period. The forecast also aims to provide additional detail concerning the village's revenue sources, claims on those sources or your expenditures, and expected short-term and long-term financial trends. This forecast should assist in identifying areas and opportunities where revenues and expenditures may be adjusted. Much of the information and data used in the preparation of this forecast has been obtained from internal financial records, trend analysis, discussion with various department managers, external sources such as the Illinois Municipal League, the Illinois Department of Revenue, and other agencies that publish statistical data and projections of their own. The narrative and the graphs contained in the forecast focuses primarily on the most important sources of revenues for the village, such as property taxes, sales taxes, per capita taxes. On the expenditure side, it focuses on the village's largest expenditures, such as employee compensation, benefits, health and pension, and commodity purchases. Also included in this forecast is the calculation of the potential impact on the village if certain state-shared revenue sources were to be reduced as a result of the current budget impasse at the state level. Some of the key items identified by staff as having a direct and significant impact on the village's short-term and long-term finances are as follows. The 2015 property tax levy will likely increase by less than 1%. This is significant as this is the largest revenue source in the general fund for the village. The portion of the 2015 property tax levy to be used to fund the police pension fund is projected to increase 32% over the prior year. This puts significant strain on remaining sources available to fund village operations. With the exception of building permit fees, recreation program fees, and cable franchise fees, many other large revenue sources such as per capita, sales taxes, and vehicle registration fees are projected to remain relatively flat or witness very modest growth. As a result of these trends, village staff has identified the following activities or areas for consideration by the board. Possible adjustment to the electrical utility tax rate. Possible adjustment to the permit fees for the utilization of the village parking lots. Possible adjustment to the water and sewer rates to raise additional funds for infrastructure improvements and capital reinvestment. Because as you may recall, the latest increases in the water rates have been in response to the increases in the commodity prices that have been passed on to the village. Current financial projections show a surplus in the general fund of approximately $240,000 for 2015. This is due in part to the following: better than expected building permit revenues, better than expected recreation program revenues, lower than expected expenditures in the village manager, finance, fire administration departments. This projected surplus does not include any year-end transfer of unassigned funds, which we just finished discussing as part of the capital improvement project plan. Current projections do show net deficits in the general fund for 2016 through 2020. And so now I open up the discussion for the board.
Just to follow up on that one last point there, because I did the calculation and I wanted to say it before we moved on from the capital projects fund. With the removal of the islands and the rubble garage, the bottom line of the capital project fund is we're basically doing projects in like about $5.3 million worth of projects, and at this point it would require a year-end transfer from the unassigned general fund of about $55,000. So that's about how much the year-end transfer would be. So with that, are there any general questions for Mr. Salinas? I thought we might go through the issues that he raised with regard to the revenue. The first one I thought we might talk about is the electric utility tax. I was speaking with the manager today, and I'm of two minds about something like this. On the one hand, I could see a possible conservation impact with regard to increasing electrical rates. On the other hand, the folks who are using the higher kilowatt usage are businesses, and then we're penalizing our businesses. So it's one of those two-edged swords. Or do you have any thoughts about the electric utility tax issue? Anyone?
This is based on the cost of the utility, not the amount it's used, correct? So it's based on my electric bill is so much dollars. There's a percentage of that dollars that is what's not how much electricity I use.
Well, it's based on the different tiers, and then there's a rate associated with those different tiers. But looking at just from someone taking a step back and looking at it, it's a percentage basis. Probably
So
the easiest
basically,
way.
what this is really saying is the cost of electricity, cost of generating electricity has gone down. Even when we did our aggregation, that aggregation impacted the fees that we collect because our residents paid less for electricity during the aggregation than they would have if they all stayed with ComEd. So if the trend is, as you're saying, that I think there's a two-pronged trend here, is not only the conservation and the better utilities that use less energy, but also the cost of energy and technology has brought energy costs down, and everything I think is going to end up kind of doing exactly what you have here, and that's kind of going into a somewhat downward trend, but it'll probably level up fairly quickly.
Overall, over the last couple of years, we have witnessed a downward trend with regard to utility tax, yes. At what point will it level off? I don't know. I mean, it still continues to go down incrementally.
Further comments? Is there any interest in staff pursuing this further at this point?
Keep the lights on.
Other non-home rule municipalities do it to the max because obviously their resources are stretched pretty thin. Those that have recognized that they're not taxing to the maximum allowable by state statute have made amendments recently.
I think that given that, I'm willing to consider it.
I guess I'd like to, we have before us rates and percentages. I guess I would like to have a little bit more information, on the ground. What does this mean for an actual average bill that somebody's going to get? So if we could get more of that kind of analysis.
We did a calculation in 2012 when this initially was brought up for discussion, so we can just revise that analysis.
Okay, so we'll be willing to take a look at this then in the future for that. The next one is the liability insurance. I mean, this board has already had a pretty extensive discussion about the level, the deductibility, the deductible level. Is there any interest in looking at a higher deductible than the 50,000?
Do you know what numbers are?
They're on here.
Which,
We currently.
It's in the very back.
Yes.
It's the very last, oh, you're on the last, yes, no, it's right here, trustee. It's this table, it's the very last page of the packet.
Oh, the second to last page.
Oh, yeah, you're right, I had two stuck together, second to the last page.
my packet's on the kitchen table.
Here you go.
Here you go, trustee.
I almost have a committed to memory.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts?
I'm comfortable with staying at 50 for one more year. Currently, we have an excess surplus with IRMA, in which we accrue 7% interest. So I would never remove those funds out of there because that's more than we can get at any bank. But we also have the flexibility on a quarterly basis to cash out if in fact we incur a deductible that is beyond what we've budgeted for, or we've had a number of claims against us where we're over budget and it's a cash flow issue. We are one of the few communities in Irma that are at $50,000. But
Tell me this all the time, Jessica, my mind still doesn't change.
No, I think it's actually. I think I'm actually going to be a presenter at our risk pool summit in the fall. So I think it's a good thing. I think we're taking a progressive stance with regard to we're quasi self-insured. I mean, we really have to look at it in that respect. If we move to the $100,000 deductible, we're pretty much self-insured at that point.
That's what I'm.
Does IRMA as a pool offer other services? Absolutely. So there is definitely a benefit of being part of IRMA. But, what is my comfort level with moving to 100? I would say we're never going to experience one claim all in 1 year at $100,000. Usually it's going to be spread amongst multiple years. So in that respect, and having the flexibility of the excess surplus, if the board decided that they wanted to move to a $100,000 deductible, I wouldn't have any angst over it. 250, I would be a little nervous. I would then make a recommendation that we make an assignment under our fund balance specifically for that to make sure that we would have a buffer against that. But if we're moving to 100, most of our claims are well below the $50,000 level. Since we've had the $50,000 level, and I'm going by memory, but I believe we've only had one claim, and I believe we're coming up to a second claim now that'll hit the $50,000 deductible. And we've been at it for over three years now, so. Or 2.5 years, sorry.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, or are we okay at 50 at this point?
I'm okay at 50 at this point.
Yes. Okay, it's like 50 at this point.
I'm risk averse.
Next up is the water and sewer fund. I looked at this. My personal sense is that given the significant increase that our residents have had to shoulder because of what the city of Chicago has done in increasing our rates, I would be very reluctant to do anything with regard to water rates. However, it does seem to me, given the massive infrastructure project that we've undertaken with regard to our sewer separation, that we might want to consider the sewer rate increase that has not been increased since 2002. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, President Solz, this is Mike. I would certainly support that. I think my understanding is our sewer rates are well below market.
How do we compare to other?
We can go ahead and survey surrounding communities and provide that feedback with a recommendation to the village board at a future board meeting.
Would you like to see that? Would you like to see, take a look at surrounding communities?
I think we have to do that anytime we're proposing increasing the tax. We have to make sure that it's justified. We have to have a comparison to what our neighbors are paying, because we don't want to drive people away from Riverside, right? We're trying to attract them here, both with economic incentives right now, trying to get people to make sure that the houses that are here are filled. So it seems counterintuitive to jack the prices and the taxes up.
Okay, so we'll get that information.
Do most of the other communities, when they bill sewer and water together?
Build sewer.
Just bill sewer and
Invoice.
water together?
As one line, it just depends.
I'd also be interested when you find out what the sewer rate is for another community, what their water rate is
Right.
for another community.
And whether or not I think another interesting component is whether or not they're also selling water. Because sometimes when you're selling water, you're increasing that rate to subsidize your resident rate.
Okay. Okay, I'd like to just see that total package.
The next one was a suggestion that we look at the parking rates. And I know somewhere in here, there is a chart that you've already done.
Last page. Right by the, what's it called? The
Yeah, there it is.
deductible page.
And it looks to me like we're pretty much right on target with our neighboring communities.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have a problem having a rate for resident and non-resident. I mean, I saw that on a couple of the other things. I mean, we have to maintain the parking lots, so.
I believe because of our agreement with BNSF, and I'll have to double check it, but usually those that have, whether it's BNSF or Union Pacific, usually if it's on part of their property, you cannot offer a resident rate.
But we could do it on our property.
Yes, but the bulk of our commuter parking is on BNSF property.
That's not what I want you to say.
I mean, it's something that we can definitely research, and I can speak with Attorney Mars and.
So the parking lot by the school club, that's not used by commuters?
It is used by commuters.
And that's,
There are certain parts, it's not a clear delineation as to this parking lot is BNSF owned and this is village owned. The lines aren't very neat with regard to which property is which. Obviously, we have a survey with regard to that, but they require that a percentage of the parking within Village of Riverside parking lot be for commuters. And based on that, usually also based on an agreement, they require that you only afford one rate when you have that type of agreement, because they don't want to preclude other people from coming to Riverside and using their line and pushing them off to another line.
okay, the next question I would ask is, does BNSF help in any way to offset the maintenance of the lots that are their property?
We have an agreement, so we receive 100% of the revenue. In lieu of that, we have to maintain the lots. And we have to also provide X percentage with regard to commuter parking. In other agreements, if it makes you feel better, in other agreements, like for example, I'm familiar with the Union Pacific one, and they actually require that the village pay them X amount of the revenue that they receive for commuter parking. So it just depends on who you're dealing with and the structure of the agreement.
And if it's, I'm kind of coming back to the paver thing. I don't mind discussing the paver things, but I don't know if I feel comfortable spending that much money on someone else's property. Could they ever come back and say, we want their property?
Attorney Mars? Could they ever come back and say that they want their property with regard to our agreement with BNSF if we do paver lots on their property, on their part of the property within our parking lots?
I don't remember them ever saying that.
Okay. It's something that we'd have to look at.
Did we put that question to them, though?
No, that's something that Trustee Ballard
What's
just
the
came up.
lease term? Was it one of these 99-year things with, or what? Do we have-
Well, I'm most familiar with the agreement for the train station, which is coming up, but I don't know about the specific lots if they're covered by.
We'll find out.
Again,
We'll look into
we're
it.
doing some research, especially when we were just talking about how we take care of financing parking lot one, right?
It'd be
If
nice-
the
it'd
parking
be
lot
nice.
one's on somebody else's property, that would definitely weigh into how you, certainly know the first half we do.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, we'll get that information.
One more question. What is the demand for our commuter parking spaces? Do we have a surplus? Do we have a waiting list?
We have a waiting list. So there is pent-up demand not only for that, but also for 24-hour parking because of some of the buildings that are close to those parking lots don't have sufficient parking behind the buildings, and obviously they can't park on the street. So there is definitely a demand for it. But if we do increase the rates, just so the board is aware, we do have to clear any rate increases through BNSF.
I would be supportive of, pushing rates. I think that demand is pretty inelastic for that parking, especially given the wait list. So I think that's an opportunity to put that money back into our parking.
I would agree with Trustee Sedovich.
We'll get the answers definitely. What am I missing, Mr. Salinas? What else did you need from us tonight?
The big one was just the property tax levy, but that's based on statute, state statute. We're constrained because the increase has to be the lesser of 5% or the percentage increase in the CPI year over year. And according to, I think this some kind of federal agency publishes the Consumer Price Index, the increase applicable to the 2015 levy is 7.6 of 1%, or 76,
Yeah.
7/10 of 1% almost, yeah.
Yeah,
Less
I
than
mean,
1%.
I mean, it is disheartening at a small community like this when, first we're constrained. We can't, we're not even able to raise our tax levy by less than 1%. And right now Springfield wants to deny us even that, which is, I don't know what towns they live in, but I hope hopefully they're hearing from their residents. So anything further with regard to the 5-year projection?
If we could just think of parking lots for one more second. It seems like, they're all over the board. I mean, you have Hinsdale at basically $155 for a quarter, LaGrange at $150 for a quarter, and they're all on the Burlington line. So I would assume that anything to those numbers would be agreeable to them. I mean, there would be no reason why they would say that Riverside should charge less than a neighbor should charge. Am I correct? Or?
Well, based on them, for example, Hinsdale, it looks like they have a resident rate. So based on that, it's probably their lots and there's not an agreement between the parties. I can check with the Village of Hinsdale as well as some of the other ones that are slightly higher. That's not to say that if we make a recommendation from BNSF that they will not agree with us with regard to the rates. It's just we have to clear it through them before we implement.
I would think we would want to, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Anything further? Hearing none, we have no new business, I don't think. Of course, Mr. Ray.
I'm aware of the fact that the parking along the right-of-way of the railroad in back of our commercial buildings is on railroad property. That's for sure. I believe that the parking lot behind the swim club is on railroad property. But to the best of my knowledge, and it goes way back to when we repaved that lot 20, 30 years ago, we reclaimed that lot. The rest of that lot that's west of the train station is on village property. Is that, we understand that?
That was my understanding as well, but
Okay.
we'll have to
Now,
look at that to make sure.
my opinion is that you should concentrate your thinking about permeable paving on what we own.
Right.
Okay? That would be my recommendation, and probably if you had to kind of split the difference a little bit and not repave it all with permeable paving, I would probably think that the drive part should be the permeable part. And that the grading be such that the water is moved from the parking position to the drive lanes. So that's an opinion, but I'm quite sure that that is, in fact, a village-owned property. You know, we had a landscape architect do those planting beds when we were given a grant by Burlington, it was Burlington Northern at the time. They gave us a grant when they gave us the train station. Riverside was unique in this. I was on the plan commission at the time. The train station was owned by the Burlington, but the property it sits on was owned by Riverside. And that was kind of unique. All the other stations down the line, it was all Burlington property that the train stations were on. But they gave us the train station. They wanted to unload that. And they actually wanted us to tear that station down and just put up shelters. You know, the plan commission refused that and launched upon a restoration project for the train station. They gave us a grant, but they said, first thing you gotta do is you gotta pay for the repaving of that parking lot. That's number one out of that grant. And number two, we had to pay for the rubberized crossing both at Delaplane and in the heart of town. That came out of that grant. Those three things came out of the grant, and what was left we were allowed to use on a restoration of the train station.
We're all glad you saved it.
Well, we came up a little short, and about a couple $100,000, about $775 if I recall, when the bids came in, and Jim Paul went to what was then the Northwest Suburban Mass Transit District that was about to be absorbed by Metro, and asked them for that money. And they gave it to us because they were about to lose it anyhow, because they were going to be disbanded and taken over by Metro.
Thank you, Mr. Ray. We do have a need for an executive session this evening to consider the appointment, employment, compensation, discipline, performance, or dismissal of specific employees. With that in mind, I'd ask for a motion to adjourn to executive session, not to reconvene. No final action will be taken in executive session. Motion by Mr. Lumsden, second by Ms. Collins. Please call the roll.
Trustee Valerie. Aye. Trustee Collins. Aye. Trustee Lumsden.
Aye.
Trustee Sedovey.
Aye.
Trustee Pollock.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned.
Trustee Sedovey, can you stay for